double glazed and you've been told they're double, straight away you've got a bit of leverage. Am I right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Anyway, so let's start with. Let's just quickly run down this, and I'll take more questions. I'm conscious you're the other side of the pillar.
Oh, no, I can see it from this angle. So
right. Okay.
Yes.
Now, these, as I say, these are standard parameters. It's not to say that every roof, that roof over there, for example, that's probably in the region, I would say, of 30 to 40 years old. These are standard parameters. It's not to say that just because that roof's 40 years old, it's automatically changing in 20, because it depends on the manufacturer, the quality of the materials and everything else. But these will give you an idea. Right? Roofs are of course a concern for a lot of people, but I'll use again this example across the way there. The best thing about a roof is you can look at it and you'll get to the stage where you'll be quite easily be able to spot any defects, because a broken tile or a deformed timber beam will stand out quite a bit because it's off the straight and off the perpendicular. So if you look at that, you can see that all the tiles are in line, none of them broken. From what I can see, it's just a bit dirty. That's not a problem. Okay. And also in winter, if you're in a house in winter and it's snowed or it's frosty, and you've got there's no snow on the roof, then that's a good indication there's no insulation in the loft, and all you're doing is heating the roof. Also. Sorry, let's go. Right, so that's roofs. Standard parameter, 60 to 80 years. Okay? So if you're looking at a house that's built in the 80s, especially if it's former social housing, the odds are it's got the original roof on. So what you need to be looking at, I mean, take a look from the outside. If everything looks fine, generally speaking, it's going to be fine, but you need to be looking into the loft, making sure the sarking felt, which is your lining felt under your tiles, is in place, because that's a very important thermal barrier. And making sure the timbers are free from damp. There might be a little bit of staining, but as long as they look reasonably dry, they haven't got any mould on, and they're fairly straight, that's all you need to do. Just stick your head in the loft. If it's cold and dark, you're halfway there. Just have a quick look around the timbers, maybe a torch or a flash on your camera, and just give yourself an idea that they're all nice and dry and straight. Walls, 60 years plus. Now, obviously, that's applying to, again, that's something that's applied to mass-produced social housing. Right? I'm sure all of you have looked at terrace houses in excess of 100 years old that look like they're going to be standing another 100 years. And if you're like me, you've looked at houses that are perhaps 20 or 30 years old that look like they might not stand another two. Makes you wonder what we knew about building then that we don't know now. But anyway, walls, that's a standard parameter again. So the things to look at with walls is, I looked at one the week before last, 1980s built, cavity wall house, dead straight, bog standard, with stud internal walls. So what you're looking at, what you're checking there, there's no damp on the walls, because that means that there's cold bridging, that's water and damp getting through the cavity. And that's really all you can look at, you know, and generally look around the outside to make sure there are no offset, there's no offset brickwork and no gaps in the mortar. Okay, pointing obviously is more important, and mortar gaps is more important on solid walls, because the gap in the mortar on a solid wall is will allow damp through onto the internal finish, and that's you've got to be a little bit quicker to repair that kind of thing on a solid wall. Windows we've already talked about. Doors and frames. Now this can apply to timber or UPVC. Some of the older doors and frames the frames certainly are hardwood, so they'll last 100 years. But I would always recommend, especially with timber, if you're replacing the door, replace the frame as well, because it's very difficult to get a timber door to fit an older timber frame, because they move and they age together. So if you put a new timber door in an old timber frame, before long you're going to get gaps, the door sticking, and if you're trying to chamfer the door down, you'll take too much off it, and then it'll shrink, and you've got gaps. You know, you can't shut the thing. Definitely with UPVC, you can't replace the door without frame. Okay, and in modern ones, you've got to make sure that the panels are properly fitted, and they're not the sort that you can just kick the panel in, which used to happen quite a lot in some of the estates I've surveyed. So doors and frames, got to replace them together. But again, they tend to be slightly more solid in manufacture, so they can last. They often do last longer than the windows anyway. But if you're replacing the two together, the other thing to look at with doors is, especially on the older houses, if you're thinking of putting UPVC in, is just check your measurements, because a non-standard, a bespoke door and frame will cost a fortune. And quite often you might see on an older house, it's quite common to see perhaps an arched doorway, and you've got your door inset and blanking panels and perhaps a transom at the top, because that's the best way. It's a lot cheaper to manufacture these panels than it is to try and get a door to fit the frame. If it's your own house and you want the door, obviously you might go for a bespoke. But just watch out, just make sure the imperial measurements don't always fit a metric UPVC door. Just bear that in mind, you know what I mean? It's just something to think about. If you're into a house and you're doing this, you get to the point where your viewings are becoming quite slick, you might just take one look at it and say, I'll be replacing that, so it's not as important. Yeah, because the odds are, especially if it's UPVC one, you'll know you'll get another one to fit it. Okay? Kitchen, the standard life for a kitchen is 15 years. Now that doesn't always apply. I've seen 5-year-old kitchens that look as if they've been there 20 years. I've seen I saw a Formica kitchen not long ago, Formica, if anybody remembers that, before most of your time. Formica, from the 70s, that was absolutely pristine. And the lady in the house, she was well into her 80s, and it looked like the kitchen hadn't been used. Absolutely pristine. Had to come out, it was too old. But, you know, it was almost a shame. I could have taken the thing to Antiques Roadshow, it was beautiful. And I've never described a Formica kitchen like that before, but there you go. So, the thing is with kitchens, especially in social housing, is about 10 or 15 years ago, they had a run on doing a type of kitchen, probably the worst I've ever seen, and these don't last at all, where the drawers and the cupboard doors didn't actually have handles. They had a recess at the top and this sort of affair. So that was your handle. And they were terrible. They still are. The handles tend to go, they're composite, the worst composite you can get. More modern kitchens are a more concentrated composition in the panels, so they tend to last longer and not deform as much. But these are almost chipboard, so the slightest bit of damp that gets in them, which in a kitchen is not a good idea anyway. They just blow and they fall. So if you walk into one of those and it's these recessed handles, straight away you're replacing it, because if you put a tenant in that, or you trade it on and they put a tenant in, within 6 months the tenant's going to be ringing up saying the handles are coming off, the doors are dropping, which you don't need. You know, you don't need that coming back to you, do you? And you certainly don't need an investor that's bought one on your, yeah, the kitchen's only 5 years old, it's got another 10 years in it, and then 6 months later they find they're getting tenant complaints because it's falling apart. Contradicting myself, yeah, they're I think it was 10 years that the last they used them. But as soon as you see that, it's got to come out. I mean, shortly after that, they started to improve manufacturing process, and if it's been looked after, you can go into a 10-year-old kitchen that's got another 10 years in it. This is the point of this process. It's not how old it is, it's how much usable life there is remaining. That's the key. Okay? As I've said, I've seen 5-year-old ones that look as if they've been there 20 and been battered and doors are falling off. But I've also seen them at 10 years old look as if they were put in yesterday. It's the usable life that you're looking at, and that's the key to getting this thing out. Especially if you're trading the property on, because you can tell your investor, yeah, the kitchen's great, it's got at least another 5 to 10 years in it, it's in very good condition. And the traders then, or the investors then thinking, great, I've got a tenant in tomorrow. If you're saying the kitchen's shot, it needs replacing, he knows that he or she knows not only have they got to spend the money, but it's going to take a little bit longer before they start getting a return on the property. And that's the difference between knowing what you're talking about and not. And it's not something you're going to learn overnight. It takes time. But you know, you don't need to be an expert to walk in and look at a kitchen and think, oh, it's falling to bits. You know, and so the key figure is the remaining usable life. And these are just guides as to how, you know, that a kitchen's manufactured to last 15 years. Okay?
How much will the kitchen cost?
Say again?
How much will a kitchen cost to put in?
You can anything from 3 to 10, you know, depending on the size and the type of units. A standard Howden's kitchen, I mean, Mark will tell you, he buys them every day.
800 quid.
There you go. There's a few local traders that will fit it for you.
That's on the range, what is it?
It can vary.
Definitely not.
I mean, it varies on type and finish. You know what I mean? If you've got a nice country property and you want to go a little bit further with it, you know, perhaps go into magnet, then obviously you,
Yeah.
it's as long, the list can be as long as you want. It depends, in terms of trading, the investor will someone like Mark will be doing the figures as you're talking to them. All they want to know is whether or not they've got to do it.
So you want to factor in some kind of figure into your refurb costs when you're doing the assessment for the deal brochures or whatever?
Good point. If you're doing that in front of the vendor, as far as the vendor knows, the kitchen's going to cost at least 6 to 8 grand.
Yeah.
Something I've done, which is a bit cheeky, but if you can get away with it, you know, if you've got a decent relationship going, you can do that. Would you mind just holding a pad for me while I just measure this? And then, oh, yeah, right, this kitchen he's doing, that's going to be about, oh, what do you think? Oh, about 6 grand last time I bought one. There you go. You should buy it out for me while I just measure this. You know. And if the vendor's done that, they've got it in their own head, and straight away 6 grand's come off the asking price before you've even said any figures, which is lowering their expectation. It's a bit cheeky, but you know, it's a business. It's what we're doing. Because you're not wrong. If you were, I mean, how much did you think a kitchen would cost before you ask about?
1.5, 2 grand, something like that.
But how many? I'll just use the term normal people then.
You're right.
That's Freudian. How many people every day, everyday occupants know how much a kitchen costs? What do they think?
That's it.
But
Five to eight grand. Yeah.
The adverts on the telly will tell you a kitchen's going to cost 8-9 grand straight away. That's how much profit's in them. That's why they advertise them so much. But that's the perception, and that's what we're doing. Is we're working with, you know, in terms of sales and everything else. We're working with a perception. Same with bathroom. If you walk in there and you've got your avocado suite, you know straight away it's well over 30 years old. But what you're looking at with bathroom isn't just the actual the look. As Mark was saying, if it's a 7mm bath, you know that using that bath on an everyday basis, if it's been done on the cheap, it's going to create problems. You know, the old way of doing it, especially with the cheaper 7mm baths, is to fill the bath with water before you did the ceiling around the side. But that very rarely happens. In social housing, you're doing, you know, I've run projects where we're doing 30 bathrooms a day, you know, on a estate of maybe 100 houses or something. You know, you're doing on a rolling cycle, so you started this batch of 10 on day 1, stripping out, and then day 2, you're starting to take the stuff away and the stripping out crew moved on to the next batch, perhaps not day 2, but weeks or whatever, you know. And this is how fast they're doing them. I mean, they're not bugging about, we're filling the bath with water before they're doing the ceiling, they're just getting them in. You know, and if it's social, I mean, it sounds like I've got a downer on social housing here, I really haven't, because social housing is obviously done in mass volume. And the materials and the costs have got to reflect that. So that's something you need to be bearing in mind. It's much different from going into something that a private vendor's selling on, perhaps a divorce case where they've been in the house and they refurbished the house themselves sort of 10 years ago. You can expect to find slightly better quality. Not always the case, but